The night the phone rang, it sounded like a mistake that would end a life or save one. The screen glowed at 2:17 a.m., a number Marcus Hale didn't recognize, and before he could let it die into silence, a breathless voice spilled through the speaker with a plea that landed like a weight on his chest. A stool. Stay with me tonight. The words were fragile and urgent, as if spoken by someone standing at the edge of a cliff, and Marcus felt the strange certainty that if he hung up, something irrevocable would be lost. He was a single dad used to waking in the dark for reasons that mattered, used to making space for fear without letting it rule him, and so he answered the call he was never meant to receive. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that one small decision can change two lives forever, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment what kindness means to you, and subscribe to the channel so these stories can keep finding their way to the right hearts. Marcus lived a life measured in quiet sacrifices. He rose before dawn to pack lunches and iron tiny shirts, to kiss his sleeping son's hair and whisper promises he intended to keep. The world had narrowed since his wife's passing, a narrowing he accepted without bitterness, turning grief into routine and routine into resilience. He worked nights as a hospital facilities technician, fixing what broke so others could heal, and the corridors had taught him to read the language of beeping monitors and hushed footsteps. That was why the voice on the phone felt familiar, even though he had never heard it before. It carried the sound of a room where machines hummed and hope flickered like a candle in a draft. The woman spoke his name, the wrong name, and he did not correct her. He told himself it was because correcting her would only steal seconds she might need. He told himself it was because some truths mattered less than comfort. The hospital room she lay in was a study in contradictions. Soft light warmed blue walls, flowers crowded the window ledge like a desperate celebration, and machines stood sentinel beside the bed, their quiet rhythms counting what could not be counted. She was younger than the word dying ever allowed, her hair brushed back, her hand trembling against her chest, as if her heart were a bird that needed calming. Marcus stood at the rail, his hands resting on cold metal, and felt the old ache rise, the one that came when he remembered sitting at another bedside years ago, promising to stay even as the promise broke him. He did not speak. He did not need to. His presence was the answer to the plea he had accepted over the phone. She had called him by mistake because the night nurse had dialed the wrong number while trying to reach a relative whose name matched his on a clipboard smudged by grief. The mistake was a thread pulled loose from the fabric of an orderly world, and it unraveled fast. She believed he was someone else, someone who had left long ago, someone whose return she had dreamed into being. Marcus felt the ethical weight of that misunderstanding press against his ribs, but he also saw the way her breathing steadied when he was there, the way fear retreated when he did not leave. He decided to be what she needed for the night. He decided that kindness did not require permission. Outside that room, the hospital buzzed with the small dramas of survival. Nurses moved with purpose, doctors traded murmured updates, and families waited with hope folded into their hands like paper birds. Marcus watched all of it from the edge of a story he did not belong to, yet belonged to completely. The woman, whose name he learned from a chart turned discreetly away, was an heiress to a fortune built on shipping lanes and boardrooms, on inherited power and expectations that had never considered fragility. She had spent her life being strong in rooms where strength was currency, and now strength looked like letting someone stay. Time softened in that room. The minutes lost their sharpness. Marcus thought of his son asleep at home, of the promise he would make at breakfast to take him to the park, and he thought of the promise he was making now without words. He worried about the truth, about what would happen when morning came and names were corrected, but the night had a way of insisting on itself. He remembered the last night he had spent with his wife, how she had asked him to talk about ordinary things so the end would feel less like an ending. He remembered how staying had been the bravest thing he had ever done. As dawn crept toward the window, the woman's story revealed itself in fragments that did not require dialogue to understand. Photographs on the bedside table showed a childhood wrapped in privilege and loneliness, a young woman smiling at galas with eyes that searched for someone off camera, a mother's face absent from every frame. A folder of legal documents sat unopened, heavy with decisions that would outlive her. Marcus saw in those fragments a familiar hunger for connection that money could not satisfy. He saw how easily the world mistook power for protection, how quickly it abandoned those who needed tenderness most. The challenge Marcus faced was not the machines or the doctors or the family that would eventually arrive. It was the truth he carried like a fragile glass. He knew that honesty mattered, that deception could wound, and yet he also knew that the night was offering him a chance to repay a debt to the universe that had once taken everything from him. He struggled with the fear of being discovered, of being judged, of losing his job or his sense of self. He struggled with the deeper fear that if he left, he would be leaving himself behind. The part that still believed staying could mean something. Change came quietly. The woman's breathing eased, her hand relaxed, and the lines of tension around her mouth softened as if sleep were finally an ally. A nurse paused at the door and offered a look that held gratitude without questions. Marcus felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the room's lighting. He realized that grief had made him cautious, that love had taught him to endure, but compassion was teaching him to risk again. He did not know how the story would end, but he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. Mourning brought consequences. Family members arrived in tailored coats and hushed voices, their grief polished by public scrutiny. A lawyer hovered, respectful but vigilant. The nurse corrected the mistake gently and firmly, and the truth settled into the room like a new temperature. Marcus braced for anger, for betrayal, for the moment kindness would be recast as intrusion. Instead, something unexpected happened. The woman opened her eyes and looked at him with clarity sharpened by acceptance. The relief that crossed her face did not vanish when the names aligned. The comfort remained. The night had done its work. What followed was not a fairy tale but a reckoning. Marcus explained himself to administrators who listened with a surprising softness. The family, disarmed by gratitude, saw the humanity in a man who had nothing to gain. Arrangements were made with dignity. The woman, aware of her time, chose generosity where she could. She asked that Marcus's son be remembered, not with money alone, but with opportunity, mentorship, and the quiet assurance that kindness could be a legacy. Marcus did not ask for any of it. He did not need to. The true gift had already been given. In the days after, Marcus returned to his routine, but the routine had changed him. He held his son a little longer in the mornings. He listened more. He found himself less afraid of the phone ringing in the night. The hospital corridors felt different too, as if the walls remembered the night someone stayed when it mattered. He understood that the world was stitched together by small mercies, that mistakes could open doors no intention ever would. If this story has reached you, if you feel that quiet ache in your chest that comes from recognizing yourself in someone else's courage, please take a moment to engage with this video. Like it, share it, and let the algorithm carry it to someone who needs the reminder that kindness still counts. Just before the ending, we ask one special thing of you. Comment the word "stay" below if you believe that being present can change a life. The last image Marcus carried with him was not of wealth or power or loss. It was of a woman at peace because someone answered a call meant for another and chose to remain. It was of a night redeemed by presence, of grief softened by service, of a single dad who discovered that staying was not just something he did for others, but a promise he could keep to himself. The days after that night unfolded like a long exhale, slow and unfamiliar. Marcus expected the world to snap back into its old shape the moment he stepped out of the hospital, but instead it seemed to tilt, as if something inside him had shifted and reality was adjusting to catch up. He returned to work, to school drop-offs, to grocery lists and unpaid bills, yet everywhere he went, he carried the echo of that fragile request, "Stay with me," like a quiet bell ringing somewhere deep in his chest. The news broke gently at first, then all at once. The dying woman from that hospital room was not just a patient. She was a name that moved markets, a face that appeared on financial channels, a billionaire heiress whose life had been documented in headlines, but whose loneliness had never made the news. Her condition worsened quickly after that night, not in a dramatic way, but in the steady, irreversible way that leaves no room for bargaining. Marcus followed the updates from a distance, careful not to insert himself into a story that was never meant to include him. yet unable to detach from the feeling that he had been part of something sacred. When the call came again, it was not a mistake this time. A representative from her family reached out with a tone that mixed formality and sincerity, asking Marcus if he would be willing to visit once more. He hesitated, his mind racing through every reason to say no. He was just a single dad. He did not belong in that world of wealth and security details and private wings. But he remembered how fear had softened in her eyes when he stayed, and he agreed, knowing some doors only open once. The room was quieter the second time. The machines still hummed, but their rhythm had changed, slower now, more deliberate. She looked smaller, as if the weight of her life had gently pressed her into the bed. This time she knew exactly who he was, and that knowledge did not diminish what they had shared. If anything, it deepened it. There was gratitude in the air, unspoken but unmistakable, the kind that does not need explanation. Marcus sat again, hands folded, offering presents instead of promises. Her family watched from a respectful distance. They had spent years orbiting power, negotiating alliances, managing appearances, and now they were learning how little any of that mattered in the face of an ending. Marcus sensed their curiosity, their confusion about why this man had been invited back, but he also sensed their relief. Someone had given her peace when nothing else could. That counted for more than they were used to admitting. As her strength faded, arrangements were made quietly. Not just legal ones, but human ones. She asked that Marcus's son be enrolled in a school she had once dreamed of attending herself, not as charity, but as a continuation of hope. She asked that Marcus be given the chance to study engineering if he wished to move beyond night shifts and survival mode. Each request was made with care, never as obligation, always as gratitude. Marcus tried to refuse, pride rising like a shield, but she insisted with a calm certainty that left no room for argument. Some gifts, she seemed to say, were meant to be accepted. The end came without spectacle. One morning the machine slowed, then stopped, and the room filled with a silence so complete it felt holy. Marcus stood as the family gathered, his role finished, his presence no longer required. Yet as he turned to leave, he realized that nothing about him was the same. He had walked into that hospital as a man carrying grief like an old injury. He walked out as someone who understood that healing did not erase pain, it transformed it. The funeral was private, elegant, and subdued. Marcus attended quietly, standing at the back, holding his son's hand. No one announced him, no cameras followed him, but when the service ended, several people sought him out with eyes full of thanks. He nodded, uncomfortable with attention, but deeply aware that kindness had ripple effects far beyond the moment it was given. Life did not become easy overnight. Marcus still worked hard, he still worried, he still packed lunches and checked homework and fell asleep exhausted more nights than not. But opportunities began to appear where walls had once stood. A letter arrived confirming his enrollment in evening classes. Another detailed a trust set up for his son's future, structured carefully so it would empower rather than overwhelm. Each envelope felt unreal, like evidence of a parallel life he had never imagined. The biggest change, though, was internal. Marcus found himself less guarded, more willing to connect. He volunteered at the hospital on weekends, sitting with patients who had no one else, understanding now the power of simply being there. He told his son in age-appropriate ways about the importance of kindness, about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs you something. Years later, when Marcus stood at his son's graduation, watching him walk across a stage built from opportunities that once seemed impossible, he thought back to that night, to a ringing phone, to a mistake that was anything but. He realized that lives are rarely changed by grand gestures. More often they are altered by quiet decisions made in moments no one else sees. The world remembered the heiress for her wealth, her legacy measured in buildings and foundations and numbers that stretched beyond comprehension. Marcus remembered her for something simpler, for the way fear eased when someone stayed, for the reminder that even at the end, what mattered most was not what you owned, but who was willing to sit beside you when the night felt endless. And somewhere in the invisible space where human stories overlap, that night continued to matter. A single dad answered, a call meant for someone else, and in doing so found a version of himself he did not know he had lost. A woman facing the end found peace not in fortune but in presence. Two lives intersected briefly, imperfectly, and left each other changed forever. That is how kindness works. It does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It simply stays.